10. The London and North Western Railway forms a straight line 180 miles long between London and Liverpool. The railroad's highest point midway at Birmingham Station is only 240 feet above sea level. If the world were actually a globe, however, curving 8 inches per mile squared, the 180-mile stretch of rail would form an arc with the center point at Birmingham raised over a mile, a full 5,400 feet above London and Liverpool. 11. A surveyor and engineer of 30 years published in the Birmingham Weekly Mercury stated, "I am thoroughly acquainted with the theory and practice of civil engineering. However bigoted some of our professors may be in the theory of surveying, according to the prescribed rules, yet it is well known amongst us that such theoretical measurements are incapable of any practical illustration. All our locomotives are designed to run on what may be regarded as true levels or flats. There are, of course, partial inclines or gradients here and there, but they are always accurately defined and must be carefully traversed. But anything approaching to 8 inches in the mile, increasing as the square of the distance, could not be worked by any engine that was ever yet constructed. Taking one station with another, all over England and Scotland, it may be stated that all the platforms are on the same relative level. The distance between eastern and western coasts of England may be set down as 300 miles. If the prescribed curvature was indeed as represented, the central stations at Rugby or Warwick ought to be close upon 3 miles higher than a cord drawn from the two extremities. If such was the case, there is not a driver or stoker within the kingdom that would be found to take charge of the train. We can only laugh at those of your readers who seriously give us credit for such venturesome exploits as running trains round spherical curves. Horizontal curves on levels are dangerous enough. Vertical curves would be 1,000 times worse, and with our rolling stock constructed as at present, physically impossible. 12. The Manchester Ship Canal Company published in the Earth Review stated, "It is customary in railway and canal constructions for all levels to be referred to a datum which is nominally horizontal and is so shown on all sections. It is not the practice in laying out public works to make allowances for the curvature of the earth." 13. In a 19th century French experiment by M.M. and Arago, a powerful lamp with good reflectors was placed on the summit of Desierto las Palmas in Spain, and able to be seen all the way from Capri on the island of Ibiza. Since the elevation of the 2 points were identical and the distance between covered nearly 100 miles, if the earth were a ball 25,000 miles in circumference, the light should have been more than 6,600 feet, a mile and a quarter, below the line of sight. 14. The Lieutenant Colonel Portlock experiment used oxyhydrogen Drummond's lights and heliostats to reflect the sun's rays across stations set up across 108 miles of St. George's Channel. If the Earth were actually a ball 25,000 miles in circumference, Portlock's light should have remained hidden under a mile and a half of curvature. 15. If the Earth were truly a sphere 25,000 miles in circumference, airplane pilots would have to constantly correct their altitudes downwards so as to not fly straight off into outer space. A pilot wishing to simply maintain their altitude at a typical cruising speed of 500 miles per hour would have to constantly dip their nose downwards and descend 2,777 feet, over half a mile, every minute. Otherwise, without compensation, in 1 hour's time, the pilot would find themselves 31.5 miles higher than expected.
G'day guys.
How you going?
Just a fellow PPL.
Oh yes.
You know,
yeah,
but yeah. Casey, how are you, mate?
Nice to meet you.
Pleased to meet you guys.
Yeah.
Guys, I'm going to ask you a question.
Yeah.
I've been flying,
Yeah.
and I've come to the conclusion
Yeah.
there is no curvature. I never allow for curvature. There's no way there's curvature. We're round and flat, aren't we?
Definitely.
We are, aren't we?
Flat as a
Thank
pancake,
you,
mate.
sir.
Flat as a pancake.
We're so, and the outer ring is south,
Yeah.
and so north must be in the middle, correct?
Possibly.
That
Yeah.
would be the only way that a
Yeah.
magnetic compass works on a flat plane.
Might be onto something there.
Yeah,
Might be
but
onto something.
you're not having me on. We
No,
are.
no, no,
We're round and flat,
Flat
aren't
as a
we?
pancake, mate. Yeah. There you go.
Thank you, man.
No worries.
You made my
Only
day.
the people at Jetstar know that.
But,
Yeah.
yeah, well,
There you
you know,
go.
I tell a few people, especially some close mates, even
Yeah,
though
yeah.
even though I'm a pilot,
Yeah.
they laugh their heads off at me.
That's
Think I'm
it.
absolute nut job.
Ah. Nah.
Hey, thanks, guys.
No worries, mate.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Yeah.
Thank you.
16. The experiment known as Airy's failure proved that stars move relative to a stationary Earth and not the other way around. By first filling a telescope with water to slow down the speed of light inside, then calculating the tilt necessary to get the starlight directly down the tube, Airy failed to prove the heliocentric theory, since the starlight was already coming in the correct angle with no change necessary, and instead proved the geocentric model correct. 17. Olber's paradox states that if there were billions of stars, which are suns, the night sky would be filled completely with light. As Edgar Allan Poe said, "Were the succession of stars endless, then the background of the sky would present us a uniform luminosity, since there could exist absolutely no point in all that background at which would not exist a star." In fact, Olber's paradox is no more a paradox than George Airy's experiment was a failure. Both are actually excellent refutations of the heliocentric spinning ball Earth model. 18. The Michelson, Morley, and Sagnac experiments attempted to measure the change in speed of light due to Earth's assumed motion through space. After measuring in every possible different direction in various locations, they failed to detect any significant change whatsoever, again proving the stationary geocentric model. 19. Tycho Brahe famously argued against the heliocentric theory in his time, positing that if the Earth revolved around the Sun, the change in relative position of the stars after 6 months' orbital motion could not fail to be seen. He argued that the stars should seem to separate as we approach and come together as we recede. In actual fact, however, after 190 million miles of supposed orbit around the Sun, not a single inch of parallax can be detected in the stars, proving that we have not moved at all. 20. If Earth were truly constantly spinning eastwards at over 1,000 miles per hour, vertically fired cannonballs and other projectiles should fall significantly due west. In actual fact, however, when this has been tested, vertically fired cannonballs shoot upwards an average of 14 seconds ascending, 14 seconds descending, and fall back to the ground no more than 2 feet away from the cannon, often directly back into the muzzle. 21. If the Earth were truly constantly spinning eastward at over 1,000 miles per hour, helicopters and hot air balloons should be able to simply hover over the surface of the Earth and wait for their destinations to come to them. 22. If Earth were truly constantly spinning eastward at over 1,000 miles per hour, during the Red Bull stratosphere dive, Felix Baumgartner, spending 3 hours ascending over New Mexico, should have landed 2,500 miles west into the Pacific Ocean, but instead landed a few dozen miles east of the takeoff point. 23. Ball believers often claim gravity magically and inexplicably drags the entire lower atmosphere of the Earth in perfect synchronization up to some undetermined height, where this progressively faster spinning atmosphere gives way to the non-spinning, non-gravitized, non-atmosphere of infinite vacuum space. Such nonsensical theories are debunked, however, by rain, fireworks, birds, bugs, clouds, smoke, planes, and projectiles, all of which would behave very differently if both the ball Earth and its atmosphere were constantly spinning eastward at 1,000 miles per hour.
In some volume, V, and over here is going to be vacuum of equal volume, and we're going to remove the barrier. You know what's going to happen spontaneously, right? The gas is going to fill the available volume once it becomes available.
24. If Earth and its atmosphere were constantly spinning eastward over 1,000 miles per hour, then north-south facing cannons should establish a control, while east-firing cannonballs should fall significantly farther than all others, while west-firing cannonballs should fall significantly closer. In actual fact, however, regardless of which direction cannons are fired, the distance covered is always the same. 25. If Earth and its atmosphere were constantly spinning eastwards over 1,000 miles per hour, then the average commercial airliner, traveling 500 miles per hour, should never be able to reach its eastward destinations before they come speeding up from behind. Likewise, westward destinations should be arrived at thrice the speed, but this is not the case. 26. Quoting Heaven and Earth by Gabrielle Henriette, If flying had been invented at the time of Copernicus, there is no doubt that he would have soon realized that his contention regarding the rotation of the earth was wrong, on account of the relation existing between the speed of an aircraft and that of the earth's rotation. If the earth rotates, as it is said, at 1,000 miles an hour, and a plane flies in the same direction at only 500 miles, it is obvious that its place of destination will be farther removed every minute. On the other hand, if flying took place in the opposite direction to that of the rotation, a distance of 1,500 miles would be covered in 1 hour instead of 500, since the speed of the rotation is to be added to that of the plane. It could also be pointed out that such a flying speed of 1,000 miles an hour, which is supposed to be that of the Earth's rotation, has recently been achieved, so that an aircraft flying at this rate in the same direction as that of the rotation could not cover any ground at all. It would remain suspended in mid-air over the spot from which it took off, since both speeds are equal. 27. If Earth and its atmosphere were constantly spinning eastwards over 1,000 miles per hour, landing airplanes on such fast-moving runways, which face all manner of directions, north, south, east, west, and otherwise, would be practically impossible. Yet, in reality, such fictional concerns are completely negligible. 28. If the Earth and its atmosphere were constantly spinning eastwards over 1,000 miles per hour, then clouds, wind, and weather patterns could not casually and unpredictably go every which way, with clouds often traveling in opposing directions at varying altitudes simultaneously. 29. If the Earth and its atmosphere were constantly spinning eastwards over 1,000 miles per hour, this should somewhere, somehow, be seen, heard, felt, or measured by someone, yet no one in history has ever experienced this alleged eastward motion. Meanwhile, however, we can hear, feel, and experimentally measure even the slightest westward breeze. 30. In his book South Sea Voyages, Arctic and Antarctic explorer Sir James Clark Ross described his experience on the night of November 27, 1839, and his conclusion that the earth must be motionless. The sky being very clear, it enabled us to observe the higher stratum of clouds to be moving in an exactly opposite direction to that of the wind, a circumstance which is frequently recorded in our meteorological journal, both in the northeast and southeast trades, and has also often been observed by former voyagers. Captain Basil Hall witnessed it from the summit of the Peak of Tenerife, and Count Strzelecki, on ascending the volcanic mountain of Kyrenia in Owyhee, reached at 4,000 feet an elevation above that of the trade wind, and experienced the influence of an opposite current of air of a different hydrometric and thermometric condition. Count Strzelecki further informed me of the following seemingly anomalous circumstance: that at the height of 6,000 feet he found the current of air blowing at right angles to both the lower strata, also of a different thermometric condition, but warmer than the interstratum. Such a state of the atmosphere is compatible only with the fact which other evidence has demonstrated, that the earth is at rest. 31. Quoting Zetetic Cosmogony, Thomas Winship states, "Let imagination picture to the mind what force air would have which was set in motion by a spherical body of 8,000 miles in diameter, which in 1 hour was spinning round 1,000 miles per hour, rushing through space at 65,000 miles per hour, and gyrating across the heavens. Then let conjecture endeavor to discover whether the inhabitants on such a globe could keep their hair on. If the earth globe rotates on its axis at the terrific rate of 1,000 miles per hour, such an immense mass would of necessity cause a tremendous rush of wind in the space it occupied. The wind would go all one way, and anything like clouds which got within the sphere of influence of the rotating sphere would have to go the same way. The fact that the earth is at rest is proved by kite flying." 32. If gravity is credited with being a force strong enough to hold the world's oceans, buildings, people, and atmosphere stuck to the surface of a rapidly spinning ball, then it is impossible for gravity to also simultaneously be weak enough to allow little birds, bugs, and planes to take off and travel freely, unabated in any direction. 33. If gravity is credited with being a force strong enough to curve the massive expanse of oceans around a globular Earth, it would be impossible for fish and other creatures to swim through such forcefully held water. 34. Ship captains in navigating great distances at sea never need to factor the supposed curvature of the Earth into their calculations. Both plain sailing and great circle sailing, the most popular navigation methods, use plane, not spherical trigonometry, making all mathematical calculations on the assumption that the Earth is perfectly flat. If the Earth were in fact a sphere, such an errant assumption would lead to constantly glaring inaccuracies. Plain sailing has worked perfectly fine in both theory and practice for thousands of years, however, and plane trigonometry has time and again proven more accurate than spherical trigonometry in determining distances across the oceans. 35. If the Earth were truly a globe, then every line of latitude south of the equator would have to measure a gradually smaller and smaller circumference the farther south traveled. If, however, the Earth is an extended plane, then every line of latitude south of the equator should measure a gradually larger and larger circumference the farther south traveled. The fact that many captains navigating south of the equator, assuming the globular theory, have found themselves drastically out of reckoning, more so the farther south traveled, testifies to the fact that Earth is not a ball. 36. During Captain James Clark Ross's voyages around the Antarctic circumference, he often wrote in his journal, perplexed at how they routinely found themselves out of accordance with their charts, stating that they found themselves an average of 12 to 16 miles outside their reckoning every day, later on further south as much as 29 miles. 37. Lieutenant Charles Wilkes commanded a United States Navy exploration expedition to the Antarctic from 1838 to 1842, and in his journals also mentioned being consistently east of his reckoning, sometimes over 20 miles in less than 18 hours. 38. To quote Reverend Thomas Milner, in the southern hemisphere, navigators to India have often fancied themselves east of the Cape when still west, and have been driven ashore on the African coast, which, according to their reckoning, lay behind them. This misfortune happened to a fine frigate, the Challenger, in 1845. How came Her Majesty's ship Conqueror to be lost? How have so many other noble vessels, perfectly sound, perfectly manned, perfectly navigated, been wrecked in calm weather, not only in dark night or in a fog, but in broad daylight and sunshine? In the former case, upon the coasts, in the latter upon sunken rocks, from being out of reckoning? The simple answer is that Earth is not a ball. 39. Practical distance measurements taken from the Australian Handbook Almanac Shippers and Importers Directory state that the straight-line distance between Sydney and Nelson is 1,550 statute miles. Their given difference in longitude is 22 degrees, 2 minutes, and 14 seconds. Therefore, if 22 degrees, 2 minutes, 14 seconds out of 360 is 1,550 miles, the entirety would measure 25,182 miles. This is not only larger than the ball Earth is said to be at the equator, but a whole 4,262 miles greater than it would be at Sydney's southern latitude on a globe of said proportions. 40. From near Cape Horn, Chile, to Port Phillip in Melbourne, Australia, the distance is 10,500 miles, or 143 degrees of longitude away. Factoring in the remaining degrees to 360 makes for a total distance of 26,430 miles around this particular latitude, which is over 1,500 miles wider than the Earth is supposed to be at the equator, and many more thousands of miles wider than it is supposed to be at such southern latitudes. 41. Similar calculations made from the Cape of Good Hope, South Africa to Melbourne, Australia, at an average latitude of 35.5 degrees south, have given an approximate figure of over 25,000 miles, which is again equal to or greater than the Earth's supposed greatest circumference at the equator. Calculations from Sydney, Australia to Wellington, New Zealand, at an average of 37.5 degrees south, have given an approximate circumference of 25,500 miles, greater still. According to the ball Earth theory, the circumference of the Earth at 37.5 degrees southern latitude should be only 19,757 statute miles, almost 6,000 miles less than such practical measurements.